night over Europe, the night of the 2nd of May, 1945. That point of fire is a burning city. It had a 1,000-bomber raid an hour ago.
Obviously, there are no other English filmmakers like Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, because they had a powerful sense of not just English culture, but an almost mythic feel for English history as a living entity. I mean, for the land, for England, and all the stories and poems and legends that grew out of it.
And here, rolling in over the Atlantic, is a real English fog. I hope all our aircraft got home safely.
There were many filmmakers, who responded to the war, of course, at that time, but Powell Pressburger did very passionate work during that time. It was propaganda, but in the best sense, in that their love for the people and the culture of England, both of which were in great danger at the time, ran so deep in those pictures made during the war years. What's so remarkable to me is that the films aren't simply uncritical, laudatory portraits of grace under pressure. You can feel a sense of renewal along with the danger. And the renewal, of course, is really the power behind A Matter of Life and Death, which is also a lament for the dead, all the young men who'd been killed.
What do you think the next world's like? I got my own ideas.
Peter.
I think it starts where this one leaves off. Or well, this one could leave off if we'd listened to Plato and Aristotle and Jesus. With all our little earthly problems solved, but with greater ones worth the solving. I'll know soon enough anyway. I'm signing off now, June. Goodbye. Goodbye, June.
When we first saw these films, like Red Shoes or Matter of Life and Death, which was retitled Stairway to Heaven in America because right after the war, they didn't want to use the word death in the title. The interesting thing was that we had never seen a credit like this, written, produced, and directed by Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger. And so myself and my friends, when we started to realize we all liked these films, we knew that there was something special going on, and we sort of sought each other out. And we said, oh, you like that one too? And yeah, and I found out not only it was a range of people from my close associate of mine, Jay Cox, who was a Time magazine movie reviewer at the time, to Francis Coppola, to Steven Spielberg. All of us had some association to instances of the Powell Pressburger pictures on television, in black and white, re-edited, including Black Narcissus, for example. All these pictures were shown in truncated forms, and we knew there were pieces of films around, lying scattered about. And we couldn't put it together, We knew that this one with the nuns in the Himalayas, there's something about the way it looks in black and white that we could tell at the time that very often a black and white print of a very, very highly fashioned Technicolor picture looked a certain way. The makeup on the actors looked different. You knew something was off. You said, there's something not quite right here. This isn't the full version. We knew of David Lean. We knew of Carol Reed. We knew of course, the great Hitchcock coming out of the 1930s out of England. But who were Powell and Pressburger? They were a mystery to us. And why did they take a credit like that on one card? And what did they do? How did they divide up the writing and the producing and directing? So in a way, it became kind of mythical. At one point, we even thought that maybe there were pseudonyms for other people in the industry because there's nothing written about them. Nothing that we could find, anyway, in America. These films are very special, but they were still incomplete. We were still discovering them. And so as the restorations began at Ian Christie and the BFI, I think in the mid-'70s, this was like rediscovering a whole treasure of cinema that was coming out of England, a whole way of visual storytelling. A Matter of Life and Death is an audacious film. It takes chances, it's funny. The unique thing about the picture is it's based on a true story of a pilot who fell out of a plane, landed in the ocean, and lived. So they came up with the idea, well, what if he was supposed to be dead? And there's a conductor who came down, played by Marius Goring, from heaven, who missed him. And now it's an embarrassment. He's got to bring him back up to heaven because he's dead.
You are determined to get me into this salad.
And what about the salad you got me into?
Now look here. You don't want me to use force, do you?
Well, you can always try.
You're Peter.
The only thing is now, as he was dying, he happened to fall in love with Kim Hunter. He's talking to her on the radio on the plane. So now that changes the situation.
Peter, my darling, come back to me.
In effect, the picture is about David Niven and Kim Hunter.
You almost got me.
Roger Livesey is the doctor, dealing with this man's brain injury, really. But it's shot and presented like a fantasy. So when you go to heaven, And people are arguing over whether he should come back or not, and they're going to put him on trial and that sort of thing.
You need not answer that question, Mr. Farland.
You're literally seeing what could be considered a very lavish, spectacular fantasy film. It's an extraordinary use of Technicolor, particularly in the lack of Technicolor in heaven. That was the idea that Pressburger had back there, where he said, why don't we make Earth in color and heaven in black and white, or monochrome, you know? And so already that switched around the concepts.
When he's starved for Technicolor up there.
Hello, Squadron Leader. We're all ready for you.
But ultimately, by the time the film is in its final stages, where he is undergoing the brain operation, you realize, I mean, you can see the picture again a second, third time, and you realize, of course, this is his depiction of it in his mind. If he loses the trial while he's under anesthesia, in his mind there's a trial going on in heaven. If he loses that trial, he dies.
You realize that by this attitude you've forfeited any chance of winning your case?
All right, but you won't get June as well.
Your Honor, members of the jury, I'm afraid he really does love her.
Don't forget, right after the war, the primary trend in film at that time was very realistic war films, soldiers coming back from war, and the real emergence of film noir, total fate, tripping up the characters. Characters are doomed from the beginning. But this went against the grain of all of that. All of this worked very well into what seems to be a very romantic and very lush and very unique picture that really makes a stand for
Hello.
Hello.
love, surviving all and conquering all.
We won.
I know, darling.
Back when I just finished shooting Taxi Driver, I went to the Edinburgh Film Festival, wound up in London. When I was in England, I said hello to a man named Michael Kaplan, who was working with Stanley Kubrick at the time. I mentioned, I kept saying, who is this Michael Powell? And he says, oh, I know him very well. It was all sort of came together, you see. And he said, would you like to meet him? And I said, yeah. And so we met him in a restaurant and talked about his films that day and told him that he had this following in America. He was always moved later, too, in the 70s and 80s, by the rediscovery of his pictures later in life. I think by mid-80s, finally, pretty much everything was put back together. You have the sense that everything about movies excited him. He was really generous in his citations of his collaborators. For instance, he was highly appreciative of Jack Cardiff's special genius as a Technicolor cameraman. On the other hand, when you look at the movies, you realize how tough he must have been. He didn't believe in compromise. He had a firm belief in his own abilities and judgment, and it shows in his movies. So I think he worked very closely with everyone, made his collaborators feel like they were a special part of the process. But I'm sure that he was very exacting and knew exactly what he wanted and very tough. I don't think any great director will ever have the legend, he was easy to work with, you know, engraved on his tombstone. But working on his pictures must have been something very special and exciting because each one was something unique, pulling together all these wonderful talents. When I finally get to know Michael and we became close friends, there wasn't a day or a week that went by where he had no project in mind that he was going to make. He would have gone on making him right to the end of his life if the money had been there. There's no doubt about it. And with an extraordinary amount of energy, too, and never taking no for an answer. It was very interesting. I always point out to younger filmmakers, you know, here's a fellow who hadn't made a picture 25 years, 30 years, but every day was planning one.